Okay, so this is a topic I'm sure you talked about when you took your biology class, but it's part of environmental science too. So if we're going to talk about biodiversity and how it comes about and the role it plays in an ecosystem, we've got to talk about evolution and natural selection. The good news is it's a pretty straightforward concept, and again, I think it's one you probably have been exposed to before. But let's just go through it. So it all comes down to this: living creatures have nucleic acid, usually DNA, that is how we operate. It's basically what allows our cells to synthesize proteins. It's what makes us us. All right. So we have this genome, which is basically these series of base pairs along this DNA, and that basically encodes our cells to be able to do everything that they do. And it replicates and it gets passed down from generation to generation, from cell to cell. Well, what happens is every time DNA has to replicate to make a new cell, then it has to be retranscribed. And in that process, there's a possibility of an incorrect base being put on. I'm supposed to have, CAGT. I was supposed to have a C, but I put a G in instead. That's just a what is it called? A point mutation. Okay, but the bottom line is that there's a mistake in the transcription. And what happens is that mistake will just get passed down to future generations, and all the future generations will have that mistake. There's no undoing it. Now, most of the times, these mistakes make no change in the form of the animal, what proteins it makes, how it looks. So we say it does not change its phenotype. However, sometimes it does. And when there is a change, when a mutation causes a change in an organism's traits or phenotype, if that is a beneficial change, it might get preserved and become more prevalent, even dominant in the genotypes of the successive generations. That's the idea of behind evolution. So let's just say that there is a mutation that these red bugs. This my artwork isn't lovely. I'm such an artiste. So here you go. Let's just say I have these ladybugs, and for whatever reason, there's a random mutation, and it turns out that this one, the mutation caused it to have green pigmentation instead of red. All right. So all the other ones hate it, right? What happens is, for whatever reason, the background that they live on turns green. Now, all of a sudden, what happens is being green is suddenly a good thing to be because it makes you hard to see. And predators can see these guys. Oops. Predators see these guys easier than this guy, so they will get preyed upon. And being green keeps you from getting eaten. So over time, everybody's green. So that's the idea behind evolution. It's really not that shocking of an idea. What's shocking to us is just the amount of time it takes for it to occur. And because we live in a 100-year time frame as human beings, we have a hard time thinking about geologic time. So it's hard for us to imagine the enormous amounts of time that actually exist for which these genetic permutations can alter an organism's progeny. Now, biologic evolution is simply the change in the genetic makeup of organisms over time. It is unstoppable. It is always. And it's just the result of these random mutations that are constantly happening. I mean, this happened. Look at coronavirus. Right now, coronavirus, we have these variants, right? There's the UK variant, there's the South Africa, the Brazil. Why are there all these mutations? There's always mutations. Now, right now, there's a lot of COVID out there. So there's a lot of replication happening. And every time there's replication, there's an opportunity for mutation. And if that mutation gives an advantage, it becomes more common in the population of the descendants. That's evolution. We're seeing it happening right now with COVID-19. Okay. And that's how you get from Eohippus, this little kind of cute mouse-like thing, into the modern equus horse. And these, we have fossil evidence showing this, but basically it's just about selecting for genes that arose through random mutations. So I use the term selected. So the idea is the driving force behind biologic evolution is this process of natural selection. So basically, natural selection means that if a mutation causes a change in a trait, and that new trait that the descendant acquired through this mutation makes them more likely to survive to a reproductive age, you notice it makes them more likely to get to reproduce, then that means that that gene is going to become more prevalent in future generations. And over time, the accumulation of these modifications, that these random modifications of genes, these mutations, ends up causing one species to morph into a different species. All right. So the bottom line between by natural selection is if a genetic mutation makes you more likely to survive to adulthood and to be able to reproduce, then that gene is going to become more prevalent over time. So basically, if it makes you more likely to survive and it makes you more likely to reproduce, then so here's a diagram someone put together. It's a little bit wrong because it's not just about that they like to eat green beetles. It's just that in this case, we'll just say being a green beetle makes you more observable. So the predators are more likely to find you, and being the red one gives you a little bit more camouflage. Well, what happens is over time, since being green has a negative consequence and being red by just random chance makes you less likely to be seen and eaten, then over time, the red gene is going to be the one that becomes dominant in that beetle population. That's how evolution works. Okay, now I want to be clear. We've never actually observed speciation occur. We've never seen a new species form, but we definitely see mutations happening all the time. We see natural selection happening all the time. We also see artificial selection. But let's just look at a case in point. You go to the doctor, and the doctor prescribes you antibiotics. You've got, I don't know, like I had pneumonia one time, right? Take these pills for 10 days. Well, you're so sick at first. You take a pill. By the next day, you're already feeling good. 3 days in, you're like, why am I taking these pills? I feel great. Well, here's the deal. You start off with a large population of bacteria in you. And the red ones are the normals, the blue ones are these ones that just by random mutation happen to be resistant to that particular antibiotic. In other words, like they can survive higher doses of it than the rest of them. Well, what happens is you take the medicine, and at first, a lot of them die off. But the ones that die the least quickly are the ones that are most resistant because they just have this random mutation that makes them a little bit less susceptible to dying from being poisoned by this antibiotic. Now, what happens is the doctor says, keep taking it for 10 days. If you do, then even all of these, resistant or not, they all die. You're clean and free to go. And thank you for taking your medicine the way the doctor told you. But guess what? That's not what a lot of people do. Instead, this is what happens. Oh, man, I feel so bad. I'm going to go to the doctor and get my medicine. You need to take this for 10 days. Sure, 2 days, 3 days later, you're feeling good. Now, look, at this point here, you're feeling good because you killed so many of these bacteria. Now, the ones that are more resistant, because they're random genetic mutations, are more abundant in your body than the ones that are less resistant, right? If you stop taking now, then these will replicate. And now look what happened. The population that was dominated by the ones that were susceptible to the antibiotic is now being dominated by the ones that are resistant to this. And this has happened so much that there are diseases that used to be curable that are now completely resistant to all of our antibiotics. Multiple resistant bacteria. It's terrible. Okay, that's an example of selection. Okay, so let's talk about selective pressure. So selective pressure is basically what's putting pressure on an organism to evolve. So in other words, like put it this way, positive selective pressure means that this genetic mutation makes you more likely to live, makes you more likely to grow up and get to reproduce and pass your genes on. That's called positive selective pressure. So I have a genetic mutation that makes me more camouflage, so therefore I get to live. I have a genetic mutation that makes me faster than everyone else, so I'm less likely to get eaten by that lion. Okay, that's positive selective pressure. Negative selective pressure means I have a mutation that makes me unlikely to survive. And so if I'm unlikely to survive, then that mutation is going to quickly get weeded out of the population and not be prevalent anymore. Now, sometimes what was not a problem, changing climate, suddenly it is, so a gene that didn't used to have a negative selective pressure can as conditions change. It's worth noting. So in this case here, there is at first there was no positive or negative selective pressure. I mean, it was equal for all of them, right? They're all kind of stand out. So your coloration was basically, I guess, a negative selective pressure for all of them because birds could eat you. But now what happens is when I have a green background, The red ones really stand out. So there's negative selective pressure. They're going to get preferentially eaten and taken out of the gene pool. But the one that has the green background has positive selective pressure. So that green gene is going to quickly become more dominant. And over time, this leads to a formation of whole new species. And there's a classic example of this that every textbook likes to talk about because it's just so freaking awesome. So the European peppered moth was just through natural selection, had these wings. Here it is right here. It's hard to see, that were very well camouflaged so they could be on the barks of trees, and they looked like the lichens that grew on the trees in the forests of Western Europe. Now, there happened to be a very small number of alleles of gene variations that made some of them have black wings. Just like there's random variation in any particular gene you can think of. And so at any time, there'd be just a small, like, 1 out of 100 moths would look like this, and the other 99 look like this. Well, then what happened was, and there are people who believe it or not, there's people who studied moths, and they had already recorded this, fortunately. Well, then what happened was, coal became a big thing, and they started burning lots and lots of coal. At the time, it was just for heating purposes in London and in other areas in Europe, and the trees became coated in soot, and they turned black. Suddenly, the lichen, once it was coated, the trees no longer look like this. The trees now look black. Now look who's got the advantage. The black one was the one. Having that black gene now had positive selective pressure, and having the speckled one, the peppered one, there was negative selective. Now birds started eating this one and not eating this one, and guess what happened? Look at this graph. They actually were collecting data. So it used to be about 99 of the moths, for every 100 moths they saw were this, about one of them was the black one. They started burning coal right in this time period, and look what happened. It flip-flopped. And in a matter of 40 years or so, suddenly you hardly found any of the peppered moths, and you just saw a lot of black ones. And then in the the 1960s, people were like, wait a second, this is terrible. You've got to have laws so you can't just dump coal into the atmosphere like that. So they clean up their act. As soon as they did, it went the other way. I mean, this is selective pressure at its most illustrative. Okay, now here's the thing. If you give this enough time, and we're talking large amounts of times that humans can't fathom, eventually one organism will morph and become a different organism. Enough mutations occur that it's just not the same organism anymore. All right, we call this speciation. And we've never actually observed it happening, but we have every reason to believe that this occurs. All right. Now, so then that asks the questions like, well, how would we know if something became a different species? You look at a Pomeranian and a Great Dane. They don't look like they're the same species, but they're the same species. If you found their bones in the ground, you probably wouldn't think they're the same species, but they're the same species. So what makes one species? What makes two things the same species or not the same species? Well, probably the best definition is this: if you can take a male and a female and breed them together and get an offspring, they might be the same species. Now, if that offspring is also able to reproduce, they are definitely the same species. If that offspring cannot reproduce, is just not able to have children, then that's referred to as a mule. And then these two are not the same. Like, you can breed a horse and a donkey and make a mule, but a horse and a donkey are the same species because that mule is unable to reproduce. Now they've done this with other things, like what you're looking at there is called a liger. Yes, they really did this. If you breed a lion and a tiger, you end up with a liger. So lions and tigers are close enough genetically that they can have offspring, but this liger is incapable of reproduction. And so it's not a new species. So that tells us that lions and tigers are not the same species. All right. Now, we can't go back in time and do that with prehistoric things, but that's probably like the best definition of what makes a species. But look at this. Look at that adorable little Pomeranian. Look at that adorable little wolf. Okay. This Pomeranian is a wolf. I know it's hard to believe, but they are the same species. And here's how we know. And don't want to get into the details, but you can breed a Pomeranian and a wolf and get a pommel wolf. All right. And that pommel wolf can have babies, can have puppies, and those puppies can grow up and make more pommel wolves. Okay. So that what it tells us is that although their phenotypes are greatly different, they're still the same species. Speciation hasn't occurred yet, as different as they look. But the reason this thing looks the way it looks is because humans took wolves starting about 8,000 years ago, and we started messing with them by breeding them differently, by selecting puppies that were less aggressive and killing the ones that were more aggressive and not killing the ones that were less aggressive. So aggression was a negative selective pressure. being sweet and cuddly was a positive selective pressure. All right. And over generation upon generation, this baby here has turned into every single kind of dog breed you can imagine. Okay. But they're still the same species, but they look different because of selective pressure placed on them by humans. And I've got a spinning beach ball, and I'm worried about that. Okay. Oh, whoops. Okay. Man. Okay. So let's keep going here. So again, we have a hard time thinking about the vastness of time. But here's the deal: the Earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years, and life has been thriving on it for over 3 billion years. So, starting about 3.5 billion years ago, we had the first prokaryotic organisms in the ocean. Everything on this planet, a whale, a human being, a bird, anything you can think of, we are all descendants of those early bacterial type creatures. And just through generation after generation, mutation after mutation over these vast stretches of time, natural selection has changed us into all these different things. Okay. And it's going to, and this is never going to stop. You cannot stop mutations from happening. They happen every time there is replication of DNA. There's mutations that happen and will go on for all time. Okay. So now that means then that the multitudinous of life, the biodiversity of life, is the result of billions of years of evolution on Earth. And so what we find then is there's more biodiversity where there's more opportunity for life to be, and therefore more opportunity for mutations to occur and for natural selection to do its thing. So what we find basically is this: areas with high productivity where photosynthesis happens a lot. And basically the two main places are on land, rainforests, in the sea, coral reefs. These are places where there's lots of food available. So if you have a new mutation, the odds are you're likely to survive. So it sets the stage for evolution to happen. And so we get very high biodiversity. There's a lot of richness of species there. Similarly, where we have not much productivity, like deserts or the open ocean or the tundra, it's difficult for life to exist. So there's not a lot of it. So there's not a lot of food available. So it's more difficult for a mutation to take hold. That the offspring with the mutation is less likely to survive. So we just don't see a lot of biodiversity there. But where biodiversity is high, an interesting thing happens. And that is we often get species that co-evolve, that they tend to evolve together over time with a mutual dependency. And we call this symbiosis. And so in regions like coral reefs and rainforests, where you have a lot of productivity, you have a lot of biologic evolution occurring, you often get these really cool symbiotic relationships. So everybody knows about Nemo, a clownfish. Well, this fish is immune to the stingers of this particular anemone. They evolved together. And so what happens is other fish come in to try to eat this guy, and they get killed by this anemone and eaten. This guy is protected by staying in here so he doesn't get eaten. So this works out well for both of them. Okay, these aphids would ordinarily be easy prey for lots of other insects, but these ants take care of them. They literally pick them up and take them from plant to plant. They'll kill anyone who tries to eat them. They're like farmers. So why would they do that? Because these guys, you can see a little bit of this little white stuff. These aphids make this liquid that the ants eat. That's the only thing these ants eat. Without the aphids, these ants don't exist. Without the ants, these aphids don't exist. They co-evolved together over time, which is a really fascinating thing. And that's why in rainforests and coral reefs, there's this awesome level of biodiversity, and it often has these super amazing relationships that you just don't find in most other places. Now, last thing we got to talk about is what's called a niche. So, a niche is basically your place, the place you fit into an ecosystem. Okay, so basically, through the process of natural selection, if there's a food source available, someone's going to end up evolving in such a way that they're the best organism for accessing that food source or for that place to live. So basically, the niche is what an animal eats, where it lives, how it behaves, the role it plays in an ecosystem. And so niches get filled, like I said, if there's an available food source, an available place to exist, some organism is going to find a way of accessing this just through natural selection. And so basically, a niche is simply the physiological, like the structural changes or the behavioral changes that occur also through natural selection that allow it to live where it lives and eat where it eats. And that was a long one. Sorry about that, guys.